So it's that time of the week again. It's You Hang Out Friday, and today I'm joined by Darren Ferguson. How you doing, Darren?
Afternoon, Warren. Not bad, mate.
Good, good. As always, we kind of do an introduction. How did you get involved with Umbraco, Darren? You've kind of been around quite a long time now.
Yeah, I almost forget. No, I was, I think it was about 2006, and I was working with sort of those kind of content management systems that cost 60, 70, 80 grand. And I went and I looked at everything that was out there that was open source, and Umbraco was the one that made the most sense, basically. I just kind of thought that if people sat down in front of it, they would understand it, and they'd be publishing pages pretty quickly, and that was the idea.
Cool, cool. So yeah, that's a long time ago now. How comes you're still using it? Why? What made you stick around for so long?
People understand it still, I guess, but no, I mean, seriously, it was. I mean, as you'll know, there are a few people like yourself and Doug who have been there since the beginning. But I mean, over the years, obviously, it grew from something that was a little rough around the edges to an incredibly well supported product. Fantastic community behind it, as you well know, and it just became a joy to work with, because if you kind of had ideas for extending it or moving it on, there was always someone around to lend a hand and to help you out and to drive you on your way. And none of the other systems, commercial or otherwise, ever had that behind it. So that's kind of why I'm still where I am today.
Cool. Yeah, that's very nice. So people may know you from, obviously you do Umbraco training, so you do level 2 training in the UK. So if you've been taught Umbraco recently in the UK, obviously yourself or Mark, one of your employees, might have done the training for him.
Yeah, I normally just kind of nip into the room to throw Mark off once in a while, so they'll know me as the troublemaker if I taught directly. So
cool. Okay. So with that, getting kind of introductions out the way, what are we going to look at today?
The almost certainly to be named SpeedWagon.
SpeedWagon.
Yes. It's a kind of an office-in gag that's kind of proliferated out into the wider world now. But no, what we're looking at is SpeedWagon. It's a runtime for Umbraco. We, in the last couple of years, we've picked up a few Umbraco implementations where people have really tried to stuff content into Umbraco that probably shouldn't have been there, and therefore we looked at kind of ways to have quite scalable websites.
Okay.
But obviously the editor experience of Umbraco is fantastic, and for actual editor-based content and defining a content structure and content types, we didn't want to touch Umbraco, but really we wanted to just remove some of the the dependencies of having a relational database and so on, and it just grew out of there, really. I mean, in 90% or even more cases, we just roll out a standard Umbraco installation. But if somebody is trying to do something that scales quickly and fast, or if they've got something that is an application that needs content rather than the content-based system containing an application, then we would consider putting this in place. And we've rolled it out a few times for customers in the last few months.
Yeah, I was literally just going to say, is this come from customer requirements then?
Yeah, I think it kind of started. We unfortunately couldn't get like the NDA to speak about the actual project in time, enough. But it was basically it was a forum, and some an agency had put it together, so all of the kind of post content from the forum was in. And all of the user stuff was Umbraco membership, and obviously, as you'll understand, trying to write a query that joins the Umbraco schema against a custom schema can often go quite wrong
Yep.
and be
certainly
pretty
can.
inefficient. So yeah, but also we had a real requirement with this forum that there were people who would use it across the world for a lot of people over a very short period of time. So we had to roll it out into Azure, and we had to put it into kind of multiple regions. And with Umbraco, although obviously you can do that, the setup time is quite significant, and also kind of the putting database replication in place across regions in Azure is painful. So we kind of thought we don't actually need the database in all of these zones. We just need the content to get out there, and that was really the foundation of the project.
Okay, that's nice. So with that kind of summary, I suppose, out the way, maybe we should take a look at kind of how SpeedWagon works and kind of what's the components.
We can do that. I'm tragically unprepared for any kind of demonstration.
That's
so I'm
fine.
Really hope
We'll wing it.
Questions and stuff like that.
I'm certainly will, mate.
Should I fire up a screen share then?
Let's do that. Let's do that.
Okie dokie. Let me know when you're seeing me.
I can see you now.
Okay. I'll give a couple of minutes overview if you want, and then I guess you could dive in if anything doesn't make sense. So first thing I'd say is, since I blogged about it a couple of times, and we just put it up on GitHub there. So if anyone's interested after this and wants to put it down and have a play with it, it's just all up here on my GitHub account. And the implementation behind it on the GitHub is just my own blog, because obviously with client NDA we couldn't put out the real world implementations of it. So I just
That's fair enough.
thought that was where I had some content. So I guess I would start just by logging into the back office. This doesn't bode well. Let me just see if I thought I'd been really slick and I had everything started up for a demo. Oh no, I did. There we go. So you can see that the blog has a reasonable amount of content in it, and it's been around for a while. You might even notice the fact it's been upgraded a few times. You can see
yeah.
Colourful original icons in place there.
Yep.
So basically, one of the things behind this is when you're actually editing and creating content, it's no different to the regular Umbraco experience. So for an editor, they shouldn't actually care about the technicalities of this. So it's completely vanilla Umbraco. The difference is that when and also, by the way, if you want to actually go and look at stuff while you're working in Umbraco, then the runtime, it still renders pages and lets you kind of click around and view the site and so on.
So far this is just a normal Umbraco site.
Yeah, exactly. So the difference is that when I publish a page, then it gets serialized to some JSON on disk, and this is what it looks like. If you look at it, it's just basically a JSON representation of an Umbraco node.
Okay, so that gets serialized to JSON every time you do a save and publish?
Exactly. And it kind of gets removed if you do an unpublish and so on and so forth. So the hook into that is just an interface called an Umbraco content serializer.
Okay.
That just gets passed a piece of content by the event. So the difference is when you write a view against content in Umbraco, it would inherit from an Umbraco template page, and the model would be oh geez, my memory's gone, like a render MVC model or something like that. Yep. But if you look at a view for the runtime, we'll go and look at a post view, for example. then the model is just something different, basically. So instead of running against the Umbraco memory cache, the Umbraco XML cache, it runs against that JSON. I mean, if you look at the kind of syntax of the view, it's very similar. You know, you can say model.children, and I think if we go look at the
I presume the model is kind of very basic or vanilla, hasn't got anything. So a doc type, for example, you've got a custom property.
Yeah.
Your model doesn't have those reflected. You still need some kind of like get content or get property value or something similar.
So if I go to the definition of the runtime content model itself, it is, you know, it's a plain object. There's nothing to it. It has a content collection, which is a dictionary of, you know, string objects, and they represent the document type properties. And as part of the runtime, again, if I go to a template, we've got similar things that iPublished content would have, like a typed accessor to get hold of a value by its alias.
Yep.
So we kind of provide the same sort of stuff you get with iPublished content. And obviously these are just extension methods. So if you want, you can go and just put more and more extension methods on top of it to do whatever you like. Don't know why I'm showing this; it makes no sense at all. But
fair enough.
but you get the idea. It's pretty similar.
Yep.
So the content. If I go, it's actually just gets written into a folder structure in the app data folder.
Yep.
And so pretty much you know what kind of resolution you're seeing on, but you see you've got the date structure of the blog. So this
exactly node for node.
Yeah, it's pretty much it's just a file system rendering of the Umbraco content tree with the file content.
So if we marry that up to the nodes in the back office, you have a node for say 2006. In the back office, but how does your rendering engine know that's just a folder? I don't need to render out, I don't know, a piece of JSON for that node, which is just a container node, really. It does
put a content.json in the folder, and that's actually the content item. So for the 2006 folder, there's a content.json, and then you'll see, if you look inside, then you'll see its type blog folder named 2006. And we maintain the sort order and the template from Umbraco and that kind of stuff as well. So yeah, again, the views basically if you've written an Umbraco view, you find this pretty familiar, this kind of stuff. It's just, you know, just looping over stuff and querying stuff and everything. But so the difference is, I guess, that that when all of this stuff is written out to disk, we remove any Umbraco dependencies from the JSON. So if there's an integer ID, for example, like if you have a media picker that picks a media item, we would pull out the ID of the media item and replace that with the path of it.
Okay, so when it gets serialized down to JSON, it's storing the absolute or the relative path to that image.
Yeah, exactly. And it would do the same thing if you had a multi-node tree picker. It would actually, rather than storing the ID, it would store a list of relative URLs which key into the content tree.
Cool.
So again, that's kind of extensible. If you go and grab the source, when something gets published, it gets run through a content parser or a number of content parsers. So there's a couple of examples in here. One of the things that you'll know about is in a rich text editor, you get local link syntax sometimes.
Yep, we definitely do.
And so the local link content parser, well, in fact, I should probably start with a content parser interface. It takes a runtime content model and then gives one back so it can do whatever it wants with it. And the local link one's horrible because it runs a regex to pull out the local links.
Yeah, because obviously it's hard. It's hard to kind of go and find that. You've got to find that local link syntax, which is quite specific in a field, which is the rich text editor content of HTML and stuff. So yeah.
So if you kind of go in and you work with this yourself, if you just go ahead and implement an Umbraco content parser, then at serialization time, the runtime would pass it through that before it gets written to disk. Okay. So I guess the point of it is that now I've got all this. That's all of my content, and I want to take it out and put it or another. And the nice thing about it is, rather than have to worry about any database comparison or whatever, I can literally move that folder of JSON plus normally my CSS and my JavaScript and my media folder into a straight MVC app, which I have here. And so up on screen here, I've basically got the blog running on this port as an MVC app and running here out of the Umbraco back office, basically. So the views as well, the just gets shared across. The structure of this is just such that anything that's required by Umbraco is in this project. Anything that's required by both is in the runtime project, and then obviously we've got some implementation specific detail as well. I'm just thinking, my brain's gone mildly blank. I was supposed to go and get some food before we started.
Sorry,
completely. Completely forgot that. But yeah, I guess so. That the other thing that's probably worth looking at is so obviously in order to get the runtime to render stuff when you look at pages in Umbraco and also within the MVC app, we need to basically root hijack in Umbraco and replace the default controller.
Okay.
So trying to find my way.
So when you're previewing this new kind of MVC app, so to speak, that's using this JSON. Is that what you're saying?
So basically, you mentioned the preview word, and I was going to try and keep quiet about the fact I haven't figured out how to do preview yet.
Okay, sorry.
But basically, when you've published something in Umbraco, you can replace the default controller that Umbraco uses to render a page. Yep. So here in application startup, I just replace it with the runtime Umbraco controller.
Yep.
And the runtime Umbraco controller just, it seems a bit odd at first, but it passes it off to another controller. The reason it does that is because we don't want kind of shared dependencies between Umbraco and the runtime MVC app. So this runtime controller can then just be used by the MVC app as well as Umbraco. All the controller does is it does a very similar thing to what Umbraco will do under just from the URL, it goes and gets a piece of content from our content service.
Yep.
And then
so that API there looks very similar to obviously the Umbraco one, because at first glance I presumed that was the Umbraco content service, but obviously this is your implementation. The same thing to get it from the JSON.
Yeah, I should have been a bit more creative with my naming, to be completely honest. There is, I mean, one of the things I'd probably change is they are a bit too close to one another, and it would be easier to read if they were separated. But yeah, this is so the content service is in runtime is actually working against the JSON. There are implementations of it that run directly off disk, and there's some that run off a memory cache, and there's some that run off a Lucene cache. So again, you can kind of swap this out with an implementation. So for a small website, you might be completely happy with a cacherless one that just runs off disk.
Yep.
But you know, for something like we did with this this forum service, we obviously had to cache everything up in advance. But all it does is it basically just uses the template property of the model to map to a view, which is pretty much what Umbraco does.
Okay, cool.
So now you're going to have to ask me some questions, because I'm kind of
yeah, okay.
I'm probably stumped slightly as to what to explain.
So obviously, you render this out all as JSON. So now I've got this website live, and I'm the client, I'm the content editor. Is this Umbraco site live on the internet somewhere? Do I go and access it on some kind of, cms.myclient.co.uk and log into Umbraco? That then serializes it, and the live website is kind of listening or copies those JSON files. How does kind of using it day to day kind of work?
So what we unfortunately, again, I was trying to get permission from the client to show what we'd done, but the client implementation has what's called a deployment adapter, and it's actually expressed as an interface, and it also hooks into the publish event. What we did with the client we had was that post publish, when the JSON was serialized to disk, it was just posted to a REST endpoint.
Okay.
And there's a runtime on the end of that endpoint, and the content service, the same one that I showed you that gets the content.
Yeah.
It has basically in there a method to add content to the runtime. So all we did was basically put it onto a REST URL, and then call add content on the receiver.
Okay, so your Umbraco site, when it saves its content or deletes content or whatever, it pings an API sitting on kind of the more static-ish version of that site, and that just goes, okay, now go and add this to the content service, which is either add it on disk, add it into Examine, add it into some kind of memory cache or whatever.
Yeah, so we've done a few kind of variations on deployment. We've had we've just with the blog, we just actually commit all of those JSON files into Git, and then we have a Git deployment out of to Azure websites, which is quite nice if you're a techie, but not obviously if you're a content editor. Yep. But as well as posting to a REST endpoint, we've got an implementation that actually writes the content into a relational structure, a relational database structure, and so the idea is that you can just add them in, but the REST endpoint is quite nice if you've got the site in a few different regions in Azure. You just basically ping each one, or put the content on a service bus in Azure for for each individual instance to come and pick the message up off the queue.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, I presume with you talking about Azure, this was done with that in mind. Well, I know you can't talk too much about this specific client, but I presume it was done with Azure or scaling in mind.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I mean, kind of, I guess with Umbraco, as most people know, the database structure underpinning it is it's not really designed for runtime and so on. And the kind of main design goal really was to remove the database completely and only use one if it were required. If that makes any sense. Mm-hmm. So, and also, the part of the objective was with this particular client, the number of participants they get, it changes kind of day by day, month by month. So, yeah, it was kind of targeted at Azure and auto scaling. The idea being each kind of Azure web app or Azure website could just be kind of. It could just be scaled on the spot, and we actually kind of ran it with the auto scaling feature enabled, so it just sizes itself basically.
Okay. again, it sounded like it was quite a specific problem initially for this client, that you was dealing with maybe Umbraco content and Umbraco members. So obviously, it sounds like user-generated content. Obviously, it being a forum or whatever. How does that get put into the mix? Does that just have its own database that was getting scaled, and kind of was this getting put into this runtime? Was this all getting deserialized into JSON, and that was just getting pushed about?
So basically, the for the forum that we ran, the actual forum application ran off a SQL Azure database. And the content was placed into a memory cache for fast access, basically. For stuff, for content in the CMS that was actually, needed to be related to user-generated content, we had a deployment adapter to write that into the database, because obviously the whole, issue with joining one type of data with another would have come back otherwise. So it was. But I mean, again, I don't see this as at all as a solution for lots of problems. I see it as kind of more of a concept, as a way to, if you've got something that that's pretty complex and needs to scale pretty quickly, I see it very much as as something we need to pull out of our tool belt quite rarely. I think as I said before, in most cases we'd just use Umbraco, but if somebody decided to, jump out of a hot air balloon from the moon or something, then and everyone in the world wanted to see it, then this is the kind of thing that we would think about rolling out.
Okay, that's nice. So you was talking about implementations, or in terms of how to consume kind of this. Obviously, I saw Kevin. Is it Kevin Jump, the USync guy?
Yes.
Had done a kind of node. Is it a node implementation that kind of consumes the same? Is it consumes the same JSON?
Yeah. So Kevin did that. Gary, who works with us, wrote one for PHP just to kind of prove the idea. I mean, we haven't rolled it out for on anything other than a .NET runtime just yet. But again, I guess one of the starting points for this was a long time ago, I used to have a customer who were a bank, and they had obviously Windows servers everywhere internally, but some security dragon decided that basically only servers that ended with an X could live in the cloud, could live outside of the.
Fair enough.
And it wasn't questionable. But and I wanted to obviously that was at the time when I was kind of learning Umbraco, and I wanted to use it for everything, so I could get good at it. So there were kind of beginnings of this then, and I mean it's quite a strong concept. I kind of wrote a blog post a while back that I just think that with content management, you've got the CMS, which is about authorizing users, versioning content, defining data editors, and you've got the thing that actually renders the website. And I see them as two different things. And by actually putting the kind of separations in place, it does mean that you can take that content and CSS and JSON, and you can put any kind of container over it. I mean, feasibly, we've got an experiment in place that basically packages it all up into a bundle and runs as a native app. It publishes a native app for a mobile phone and so on. So we just kind of see it as a way of being able to push content from Umbraco, which is our favorite CMS, to anywhere really.
Yeah, so it's making it agnostic, isn't it? At the end of the day, doesn't really matter where you're kind of pushing this or deploying this to. So obviously with Node, like you said, PHP, or even like you said, bundled phone applications or whatever.
Yeah,
it's nice to deal with that. But how? So obviously that's more kind of content focused. Is there kind of any? Is there any plans in terms of dealing with kind of the members in Umbraco? Because obviously that's quite relies on the database and things like that. Or is this ever only going to be kind of focused around content?
Well, obviously I've got the platform at the moment, and people can't argue with me, and lots of people probably would argue with me, but I wouldn't actually. I don't really think that membership belongs in the CMS. I think that's a facet of the runtime. So if I were kind of doing something that involved membership, I'd probably just use the .NET membership provider against the actual runtime application right now. I mean, it's kind of the people who argue against that have probably got a point, in the sense that then you have to have a kind of an admin app on your live application, and you've got two places to administer stuff. But again, probably the approach that I would take is to build a custom section into Umbraco. In fact, I think somebody's done a package for Umbraco already that allows you to administer a regular membership provider through the Umbraco back office. But
okay, that's nice.
It fails me who that was.
Oh.
So I'm not deliberately not giving credit. I honestly I'm getting older. My memory's nothing like it used to be.
Fair enough.
But there are a few things missing. I mean, we definitely need to to add in dictionary support, for example. Because that obviously is stuff that should go to the runtime. But mind you, if you do kind of Vorto sites, then that's less of a concern, because everything
obviously
just
you've
gets
got one-to-one. But how would you? Obviously, you got that. Is there anything else that you think is missing, kind of from your implementation? Obviously, dictionary being one. Obviously, we talked about members, that you would deal with it in another way.
I think to be honest, that preview is something that isn't done at the moment in any way. So obviously that's a pretty important thing. Though I guess less so, because when you're publishing here, by nature of the way it works, you're not publishing to live, you're publishing to preview. But it would be nice to have a working preview. I think the other thing that would kind of need some TLC if it were to be used. The great thing about Umbraco is you're basically somebody who can use a browser, and you can log into it, and you can be creating a site within an hour or two. Yep. I think with this, the challenge with it is it's very techy. It'll probably remain very techy, but to kind of get people to think about using it, I think it would need some kind of UI around deploying content and pushing content out, because there's a bit of manual copying and pushing stuff via REST.
And it depends on the implementation and how you're gonna get it out to said external website. Yeah, that makes sense.
The main thing, actually, because hopefully that some of the smarter Umbraco community members are listening in, there's one problem we need to solve, and that's kind of why it's on GitHub, and I'm up for some suggestions. Is basically with Umbraco, as you'll be aware, when it starts up, it kind of builds the cache into memory, and it kind of sometimes builds an examine index, and it does all that in startup. And what I'm really trying to get to is, I said we've got a few implementations of the content service, this iContent service. Now, some of them just don't cache anything and read from disk,
so just
which
read the file. Just go grab it.
So obviously that's really gonna suck if you've got hundreds of pages and it has to read dozens to render a page. So then we've got a cached implementation, which does basically exactly what Umbraco does. It kind of looks at all of that JSON when the application starts up and loads it all into memory.
Okay.
That's fine if you've got let's say up to 1,000 content items. It's a couple of meg in memory, but you do have a little bit of an overhead in how long it takes the thing to come up. It's got to do all that when it starts up. So to make it kind of truly cloud and stateless, you really want instances to spin up and start right away. So I guess the difficult bit, and it's a problem that Umbraco has, and it's a problem that this has too, is really what you want to do is to get the cache to build progressively as things are requested. And the really difficult problem is for search. So obviously, if somebody does a search on the site, you can't build that progressively because you need
all the content to be there.
You need everything in your index, and that gets equally difficult when your instances are agnostic of one another. I'm always worried whether that means don't believe in or don't care about each other. But if the instances don't know that one another are there, then they kind of have to build their own indexes and so on. So that's the whole kind of. I nearly swore then.
That's fine.
What's another word for things that confuse you? The head.
Yeah,
messing with sort of concept thing. Yeah, you know what I mean. That's the thing that, because again you could do that by having like a Azure Search or Elasticsearch or something, but again you really want to keep it stateless and simple so you can roll it out very quickly.
Okay. I'm gonna throw a spanner in the works. Obviously at Code Garden this year, there was a talk from Shannon, obviously with the kind of the reverse analogy of load balancing, and obviously the kind of the stateless stuff that you're talking about. Instead of kind of the stuff gets pushed to each server, it seems to be working on a pool basis. Is that something that would combat your problems that you're kind of trying to resolve for this client? Would that kind of stuff come in? I know it's not released yet and it's still in beta, but would that, if that was out and it was stable, would that have been a solution for you for this client?
Not for this client, but I mean it's an awesome development, and it's gonna basically actually make this even more of an edge case, because for some sites we've got kind of the ability to deploy into Azure websites quite easily. Then that's fantastic. I think the points that it doesn't address for me are, well, first of all, the ability to roll out and scale up quite quickly across multiple regions. With that enhancement, you'd kind of still really need to deploy Umbraco into 7 Azure websites in multiple regions and get it working well is quite interesting. I mean, it would work because it would pull off a data, but it would pull from the database.
But obviously, you wouldn't have that instant start up, because like you said, obviously it needs to go and rebuild that cache in memory, and the same for examine indexes. So when the server's spun up, doesn't necessarily mean the site is live and ready.
But don't get me wrong. I mean, that's a really, really tough problem to solve with Umbraco, and I kind of understand why it's like that. And again, we're talking like super edge cases now. Yeah. But I think the only other reason it probably wouldn't be suitable for the project that we just had is the kind of user generated content aspect of it. Mm-hmm. So we still, even with the kind of current improvements, joining Umbraco members onto custom database tables is, it would still be problematic. So, we would still need to plug in a custom membership provider, or our own custom tables and that kind of stuff.
Okay. I think I'm just quickly skimming to see if we've got any questions or anything like that. Is there anything you kind of want to add or want to kind of touch base on, just in case that we've missed anything?
Me? No, I guess so. I mean, if it's of interest to anyone, I'd just encourage them to have a look. Really, like I say, if anyone had any thoughts on, specifically with search, how you could spin up and start serving content quite quickly, and then kind of progressively build the index in the background, that'd be awesome. There is some kind of prototyping stuff in around that, but that's the main thing I want to do with it, and I just get some input and feedback, because it's been developed in a bit of a silo, really, and also very quickly. So I apologise if you do read through it. It's there might be the odd obscenity in the code remaining from when I was putting it all together.
We've all been there. We've all done it.
Absolutely.
Okay. So the best way to kind of get in touch and kind of contribute is to jump over onto the GitHub project that you're showing now.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay then. I think we'll wrap up there then, Darren. It's been awesome talking to you, and yeah, it's a very neat project. Like you said, it is obviously quite specific or edge case, but it's still been an interesting project to see, and yeah, one that hopefully that if someone else needs it, there's obviously the solution out there for them. Excellent. Go and grab some food, and I'll catch up with you soon. Cheers, Darren. Take care. Bye.